Good afternoon. I just want to take a moment to provide you with a small update on the ongoing dispute that British Columbia has triggered with Albertans and all Canadians. As everyone now knows, last week, or a little over a week ago, the Government of BC proposed new regulations to its Environmental Management Act. The fifth proposal, Point 5, proposed that regulatory restrictions be placed on the increase of diluted bitumen transportation. What British Columbians, Albertans, and all Canadians need to understand is that under the Canadian Constitution, BC has no authority to impose such a regulation. It's unconstitutional. And of course, as I've said before, it is an attack on Alberta's primary industry and the hundreds of thousands of jobs across the country that go with it, including tens of thousands of jobs in BC. So last week, as you know, I responded to BC's provocative and unconstitutional threat by suspending talks on purchasing electricity and by stopping the importation of BC wine to Alberta. As I've said many times, neither of these were easy decisions. We don't want a trade war. But the government of British Columbia must understand that unconstitutional attacks on the jobs and the economic security of their fellow citizens in a neighboring province are simply not on. If they didn't get it a week ago, I certainly hope that they get it now. Now, my understanding is that the federal government is talking with British Columbia. As we end the second week of this dispute, for the time being, I am willing to let those talks continue without further retaliatory action. Let me be clear. It's in British Columbia's power to put this issue to rest by acknowledging that it overstepped its authority by making this threat. They can drop Point 5, follow the law, and halt their campaign of harassment of the Trans Mountain Pipeline. Or they can dig in their heels and pretend they are a separate country with powers to make whatever laws they want, with no regard for the Constitution or the views and rights of other Canadians. We don't seek an escalation, but if BC continues to insist that they have rights to attack Alberta's economy that they don't have, we will have no choice to respond. Tomorrow, we will be launching new tools so that Albertans and Canadians who want to voice their support for a strong economy and a strong environment can do so to the BC and Canadian governments. As well, later this week, I will be meeting with Task Force members to map out additional strategic selections. And of course, I'll continue our job of reaching out to Albertans from all walks of life to join us in this fight. This is a critical moment for our country. We can either act as one nation with a common future, committed to jobs, prosperity, social justice, and a clean environment. Or we can continue this unnecessary fight. The ball is in BC's court. So I'm happy to take a couple of questions.
How far are you willing to take this fight? Correct me if I'm wrong, but you had to go and put real hardship on BC. You could refuse to transport the gas from BC. You could cut off imports of BC electricity, or you could stop the permits, or periodically stop the permits of the oil that's now going through the Kinder Morgan line. You have options to invoke real hardship on this province. Are you willing to go that route? How far will you go?
Well, there are a number of options. You lay out some, and there are, frankly, many, many others as well. Part of what I've said last Friday, though, is part of the point of a strategic rollout of options is to do it on a strategic basis. So I'm not going to speculate about which option will come into play at which time. We're going to keep a close eye on the state of play between right now the federal government and officials in BC, and we're going to give them a little bit of space to have some conversations. But you are right that there are a number of other options that we can still consider, but we would roll them out at the appropriate time. One of the key things, though, that I will say, and which, of course, underlines the decision that we took last week with respect to wine, even though people will say, oh, wine's not connected to oil. the key principles that we are working with is to do the least amount of damage to the Alberta economy and to Albertans and the very people who are seeking to make their way out of the recession and into the recovery that is our government's primary purpose. And so that's one of the critical characteristics about the wine boycott is that it has limited impact on the economy in Alberta.
Just to be clear, you're not ruling it out. You're not ruling out any options.
There are no options that we are ruling out.
Because it's interesting, but before, when the issue about turning off the taps came up, you said, no way, you're not going to build walls around Alberta, and that was not an option. Now it is an option.
I think it's probably going a bit farther to pick one specific thing and say I've now said that this is an option. What I'm saying is that there are a whole number of strategies that we have at our disposal, many more beyond which you outline, and all of them are there for us to look at as things move forward. But I think the key thing is that we don't want to do thing that causes more harm to the Alberta economy than it does to the BC economy. So I mean, we'd be pretty far along the road, I've got to say, a lot farther than I ever see us getting. But, the reality is you cut off shipments to BC, it's Alberta's economy that feels that more than BC's.
Just to follow up on that, speaking of options and issues you can look at, Jason Kenney has been calling for twice now an emergency session of the legislature. And you said no, I believe. Is that right?
No, I mean, I appreciate that Mr. Kenney is, generally speaking, supporting the approach that our government's taking. And I certainly encourage him to sign up with some of the tools that we'll be rolling out tomorrow. But I think that what we need to do is not be talking to each other inside this building, but rather speaking to people across this country about the import of our position. And so that's what we're going to do.
What's the timeline here? You said you're going to give BC space, but how much space and what does the timeline look like in terms of rolling out?
That's a really good question, and I can't give you a clear answer. For the moment, what we've done is we've said we're going to give them a little bit of space. We're not certainly going to wait indefinitely, and we're going to assess it every day as we see what kinds of signals we get out of BC and out of the federal government. For the time being, as I've said, we're prepared to give them a little bit of time to talk. And we'll keep a very close eye on it.
Premier, why have you not, what strikes me about this is that the feds have been very clear. This pipeline will get built, and we will enforce our powers, and yet you still go down this path. Do you not, is there a trust factor here now with them?
No, it's not a trust factor with the federal government. What it is, really, to be very clear, is it's about this 0.5 in what it was the BC government rolled out 2 weeks ago Tuesday. And that is where they talk about their alleged ability to pass regulations associated with this consultation that they're planning to engage in to limit the amount of bitumen that can be transported in a pipe. That, to us, is, as I've said, it's completely unconstitutional. It's a made-up authority. It's a made-up law. It's ridiculous. But the very act of threatening it also brings about an outcome. And so that threat must be removed. So we appreciate that the federal government gets the ridiculousness of it as much as we do. But sitting back and letting BC threaten it and not doing anything to tell them to pull back the threat and stop walking around being ridiculous, that's the key, the key objective that we are seeking. They've got to stop talking about their ability to do something which is illegal.
How serious, though, are you about, I wonder, because you're saying that, we're on this trade war, but we sure don't want to impact Alberta at all. Well, if you go into a war, there's casualties on both sides. And if you really want to make a statement, I'm not sure that you can do that. You can't. How do you do that? I guess makes me wonder, how serious are you about actually, when you launched this trade war, how serious are you about pursuing it? Are you just going to nibble around the edges, i.e. wine?
I think that, we've gotten the attention of federal officials. I think they are definitely working on trying to find a solution, and they know we're serious. And all I will say is there are other tools that we have at our disposal that will turn the temperature up and the volume up even more than we already have, and we will reserve our right to roll those out in the most strategic timing possible.
You mentioned the tools tomorrow. We'll see some more tools tomorrow.
Yes, we'll be launching, basically online tools for Albertans to be able to engage with people in other parts of the country to help make our point around why this is so important for Canada, for the Canadian economy, for Canada's environmental progress, for all these issues. And so you'll see more about that tomorrow. But you know, it will invite people to sign up to deliver their message to key political figures, and it will also invite people to sort of tell their story. And we'll be supporting ways in which that can be promoted, specifically in certain parts of the country where it needs to be heard more than others.
Premier,
Take Kim's question and then we'll go to the phones.
Given that Premier Horgan, or John Horgan, was elected in large part due to his opposition to the pipeline, how likely is it that anything is going to change his mind? Anything?
Well, I'll say that, you know, during the campaign, he talked about tools in the toolbox. And I've always been, you know, and so he didn't actually get elected saying, I will stop this pipeline. What he got elected doing was saying a lot of things, one of which was, on the matter of the pipeline, I'll use every tool in the toolbox. I'm suggesting that it should be a toolbox that's legal, not a stolen toolbox, not a toolbox that belongs to a different level of government. And so that's all we're suggesting. And I would actually say that I think that John Horgan's government got elected for a number of reasons, not just that one. And as is the case with all governments, they'll have to look at the overall picture in terms of what they can move ahead on and what circumstances they inherit once they get elected. I would argue that what they inherited was a decision that was effectively made before they got elected.
I was just going to ask if, in terms of the federal government, what tool do you think the federal government should use to, I guess, cause BC to back in?
Well, you know, that's just the thing. I mean, the federal government has a number of different tools. They have parliamentary tools. They have judicial tools. They also have negotiating leverage, shall we say? And it's not for me in the federal government to be the one to publicly direct their campaign. For the moment. If I believe, as I do currently, that we have their attention and that they are working to resolve the problem, then I'm going to let them engage in the strategy that they think is best. If at a certain point I think that they're not doing everything they can to get this to go to the place that we think is acceptable, and I laid that out very clearly, then we will push harder. But for the time being, we're prepared to give them a bit of time to see if they can get this fixed.
We're going to the phone lines now. Operator, please put through the first caller.
Thank you. The first question is from Chris Barco of the Calgary Herald. Your line is open. Please go ahead.
Hi, Premier. I'm just wondering, in your conversations with Premier Horgan, can you tell me, is your message about Alberta taking serious action on climate change, whether it's the carbon tax or the oil sands emission cap, is it being ignored by the BC government in this debate, in your estimation?
I think that what they focus on is, I don't think they're ignoring it in terms of the in terms of our work on climate change. I would suggest that there are other environmentalists that continue to confound the issue of greenhouse gas emissions and climate change with the with a pipeline, and so that's a different issue. I think that the issue that the BC government is primarily focused on right now is marine safety.
Do you have a follow-up, Chris?
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Operator, please put through the next caller.
Thank you. The next question is from Kyle Bax of CBC. Your line is open. Please go ahead.
Hello, Premier. I have a question about orphan wells. The Redwater Energy case is going to the Supreme Court this week. How important do you feel this case is for Alberta, and what outcome would you like to see?
Well, you know, for the moment, I don't think I'm going to get too involved in saying specifically what it is we want the courts to determine, other than to assure that we're in a position to be able to protect the rights of Albertans and to collect on behalf of Albertans as much as possible when it comes to outstanding liabilities arising from the improper remediation of orphan wells. So this is something that is very critical, because we need to be able to ensure that the people of Alberta collectively are protected as these wells are, you know, as they move on from work on these wells.
Do you have a follow-up, Kyle?
No, that's fine.
Operator, please put through the next caller.
Thank you. The next call is from Carrie Tate of the Globe and Mail. Please go ahead.
Hi, thanks for taking my question. Premier, what are the feds telling you that they're doing?
Well, I think for the moment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to let them work on what they're doing. I think on the weekend, Minister Carr was fairly clear that they take quite seriously the threat to engage in unconstitutional activity. And I think he was clear that they were looking at a range of options. I'll let them get into more detail about what they're doing. But let me say this. I remain absolutely committed to standing up for the people of Alberta and the jobs in Alberta that rely on having this project go forward in a timely way. As far as I'm concerned, the threat of engaging in unconstitutional action is a bar to this thing going forward in a timely way. So when I say we're going to give them a little bit of space, we're talking days, not much more than that. But during those days, we will let the federal government exercise and use the tools it has at its disposal at its discretion.
Follow up, Carrie?
Yeah, I understand that you're, not telling the federal government what to do, but what are they telling you that they're doing?
And again, I think my point is that I'm going to let them tell you what they're doing and let them choose to reveal what their strategies are as it works for them. That's not for me to do.
Operator, please put through the next caller.
Thank you. The next question is from Rick Bell of the Calgary Sun. Your line is open. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Premier. A few days back, you suggested that the federal government was talking a good game, but not necessarily doing enough. Are you confident that by giving them this breathing space, they will come through and they will do enough to resolve this issue?
I think that's going a bit farther than I would. What I'm saying is that I think it's appropriate to give them a little bit of space to try and do the work that I am confident they are doing. Whether it goes far enough, whether they are successful at this point, to say I'm confident in it one way or the other is a bit more than I would suggest. What I am saying is that as a tactic, which is part of the overall strategy of underlying the goal, which is number one for me, which is to get this thing fixed and to make sure this project goes ahead, to make sure that Albertans are protected, this is right now the right thing to do, just to give them just a bit of space, and so that is what I'm doing. And should we review and reconsider tomorrow or the next day and decide that it doesn't look to be creating the results we'd hope to see, then we will continue to move forward.
Do you have a follow-up,
Do you
Rick?
feel, though, that their attitude is, just from the sense of your discussions with them, do you feel their attitude will be sufficiently aggressive to perhaps get the kind of result we're all looking for?
I believe that there is a desire on their part to get this done and to get this resolved, and so we're going to give them some time to do it.
We're going to take one more caller from the phone and then Paul's question before we wrap up. Operator, please put through the next caller.
The next question is
you
from,
had like 5.
Yes, I'm sorry. The next question is from Don Brady of the Calgary Herald. Your line is open. Please go ahead.
Premier, it's been reported that you're not going to the NDP convention in Ottawa on the weekend. I wonder if you could explain why. Is this political boycott number 2? But maybe you could just give us an explanation of why you won't be there especially after last year's fraught one in Edmonton. Thank you.
Actually, the one you're describing was 2 years ago, but basically, Dawn, it was really never a thing that I was ever intending to do. I attended the one in Edmonton because it was in Edmonton, and generally speaking, there's a lot of stuff on my plate right now. We're getting ready for a throne speech and a spring session and a budget, and my focus is on Alberta. I know that's not necessarily the case with all Alberta politicians these days, but my focus is definitely on spending my time here in Alberta working for Albertans.
Do you have a follow-up, Don?
I'll just run one further thing. Thank you. How do you feel about Christy Clark's intervention on the weekend at the Manning conference, where she basically took your position, saying it's illegal, this opposition's illegal, and do you welcome that?
Well, I welcome that, along with the opinions that have been offered up by politicians from all stripes across the country, as well as labor leaders and legal scholars and business leaders from across the board. Because the reality is that it is unconstitutional, and we need to move past the place where we're at now, where we have provincial governments threatening to engage in unconstitutional legal action that creates just an unacceptable level of uncertainty in the investment community.
Paul, go ahead.
Just so I'm clear, Premier, have you spoken with Premier Horgan since this all broke? Have you spoken directly with him?
Yes, I did. Whenever it was, over a week ago now, but we did speak, absolutely.
And it was civil?
It was civil, but well argued.
Since the wine ban, have you spoken?
Not since the wine ban, no.
Okay.
We're going to leave it there.
Sorry, I just want to ask quickly.
Except for Tom's question.
Have you heard from...
Sorry. Okay, this is it. I'm going after her. I'm going.
We've heard from the federal Conservatives. We've heard from the Liberals. Have we heard much from the federal NDP? Are you hoping for more help from maybe the federal NDP on this file? Or are you hoping to hear more from
Not really.
Meat or Peggy Nash? No, not at all?
No.
Okay. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.